All right. All right, we are live on YouTube and we have participants joining us on Zoom. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are gonna wait just a few minutes to let some more folks join. And all right, we are live on YouTube. Sorry, I had my audio going in two places. Yeah, so we'll just wait a few minutes. I'm going to share the link to the live stream in the chat. And if you could share that with your networks, that would be great. And we'll get started in just a minute. All right. Thank you to everybody who's joining. I see we have growing participant list on Zoom, and we have some folks on YouTube. I'll start by introducing myself, which I always forget to do. My name is Elaine Spivak Rodriguez with the Alliance for Global Justice. AFGJ is one of the organizations involved in putting on these ALBA Solidarity webinars. The other organizations involved, I'll mention right now, include Chicago ALBA Solidarity, Task Force on the Americas, Orinoco Tribune, Frente Hugo Chavez para la Defensa de Pueblos, Vancouver, Alberto Lovera Bolivarian Circle of New York. So thank you to all the people who helped make this webinar possible. We will be posting, we're recording right now, we will be posting it at AFGJ in the days following the webinar. So you can access the recording there if you want, or on YouTube. The agenda for the webinar this evening, we'll start by introducing Carlos and hear a few words from him. And then we really are encouraging your questions. So if we really want to let your questions kind of guide the conversation. So please, as your questions come up, put them in the Q&A. We will also try to keep an eye on the chat, but just to make sure we see it, please put them in the Q&A if possible. Then we are going to have William Kamakaro come on at the end and give us a brief update about the organizing going on for the Tijuana conference, the workers' conference that's happening in Tijuana, June 10th through 12th. And then we'll close out at the top of the hour. So that is the end of my introduction. Thank you again for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you now, Stan.
Okay, thanks, Elaine, and thanks for the Alliance for Global Justice for hosting this webinar. These are one of the mostly monthly webinars that we've been doing on Venezuela for the last few years. We decided to do this webinar on Venezuela's position and statements about the war in Ukraine and Russia because there are a lot of similarities with what the U.S. is what we're hearing in the media about Russia and Ukraine and what we hear in the media about Venezuela in the media. So the one thing that the amount of fake news about Russia and Ukraine is very similar to the kind of fake news we've been hearing for years about Venezuela and also Nicaragua and Cuba. Also, Russia is being U.S. has imposed draconian sanctions on Russia, just as it has against Venezuela, basically a full-scale blockade, as it has done the same on Cuba and Iran and North Korea. And we've also experienced a lot of the fake news we hear about Venezuela. We also hear the same media making the same fake news about Russia. Another similarity is that the U.S. is hostile to Venezuela, Cuba, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Iran, North Korea, China, Russia, because these countries are standing up to build a multipolar world, and the U.S. is adamantly against that happening. It still wants to maintain itself as the one world superpower. And the kind of actions it is taking against Russia, the same kind of actions it's taking against Venezuela, but on a more extreme scale and more drastic consequences, because Russia is the other major nuclear power. So I wanted to, since people in the United States are not very well informed about a lot of the history of what was going on in Ukraine before, and we only get this corporate media news about what's going on and what was the cause of this war, Venezuela has been making very good statements and reports about what's led up to this war, and their position is a very well-informed one. So I wanted to ask Carlos Ron from the Simon Bolivar Institute for Peace and the Vice President for North America for Venezuela to speak a little on why Venezuela has its positions it has on Ukraine and the war in Russia, and then we can open up for a lot of questions and answers for people. So he can explain in more detail. Okay, Carlos.
Well, thank you very much, Stan and Lane, and all the friends from the Alliance for Global Justice and everyone who's tuned in. As always, it's a pleasure for me to be able to communicate with you, and hopefully, we'll have a interesting debate conversation. I want to start by saying that, and by emphasizing something that that I think is important. Venezuela is not a part of the current military operation, obviously, that is taking place in Ukraine. And as such, I think it's always important to remember that under the Bolivarian diplomacy for peace, what we would hope, the ideal outcome of this current situation is that we can find paths and ways through diplomacy so that they can be resolved. Again, we have always stood against war, and we have always stood against these type of very dangerous actions that take place where a lot of people suffer and lose their lives. Not just the conventional types of aggressions, war and combat and so forth, and military involving military operations, but also there's the other type of warfare that comes with hybrid war. Warfare that affects countries such as ours, in the economic, financial, and other spheres, which are many times as mortal, as harmful as type of conventional military confrontation. So it is always, and it has always been the position of Venezuela that, you know, we're currently in a world where we just faced a terrible pandemic. We're still facing a terrible pandemic. We are facing a very dangerous situation as a result of climate change and the effect that it has on our whole planet. We should be striving towards cooperation. We should be striving towards understanding and not towards other conflicts. So that being said, I just wanted to state the importance of diplomacy and how much we believe and we stress that diplomacy has to be the way to solve, in the end, most of these issues. Now, when we look at the recent events in Ukraine, we must realize that we can't just talk about what has happened, since February to now. I think we need to understand, one of the things like Stan mentioned, that I think is very important. One of the things that's going on in our world is that we are moving towards a multipolar world. And this is a move that has begun already, for the last, at least, for Latin America. It has been something that has been going on during the last 20 years. So we're moving towards the strengthening, at least of the Latin American pole, and that being, we're striving towards more unity at the regional level. We're striving towards consolidation of and defense of our national sovereignty and our national resources, and trying to cooperate and work together. Now, this happens in Latin America, but this is also happening in other regions of the world where the United States is no longer, or not necessarily, the one unipolar, superpower that dictates, how things and how life should be and should take place. So, we have seen in recent years the consolidation, the reemergence, the strengthening of countries, primarily countries of size and importance of Russia as well as China. And you see that this obviously threatens the hegemony that until, or that since the fall of the Soviet Union has sort of, predominated most of the world. This is the U.S. U.S. imposed hegemony. So as we strive towards this new world, it is becoming very obvious that the United States feels a threat. You can read reports by the national intelligence agencies in the United States pointing towards the threat, or what they foresee could be a problem in the coming years, time periods of 5 to 10 years, where the U.S. can actually lose supremacy over the dominance on technology, certain technologies, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, etc. These are all technologies that no longer are just a place where the United States can dominate, but you actually have other countries that can replace the United States, or that can have a similar or even higher development. And this, of course, has threatened the U.S. and the the certain centers of power and of interest from the U.S. And I think this is sort of what is developing with this multipolar world, and it's sort of what has led to this more aggressive, offensive actions that we have seen primarily in the recent months, but that also come from way back to, at least in the case of Ukraine, to at least 2014, where there has been constant growing of threats against the security of Russia. Now, I say this because I think from the Venezuelan standpoint, we understand that the growing expansion of NATO, which is an alliance that by no means is a defensive alliance, it has been an offensive alliance. It has been an offensive alliance not only that is not only there to counteract the Soviet Union at this moment, but that we have seen in recent years that has been employed to expand U.S. militarism and U.S. dominance over other parts of the world. And when we look at who is responsible or who was responsible for the invasion of Afghanistan, who was responsible for the invasion of Libya, for example, two countries that are sort of way off the spectrum of what we would have thought originally was NATO was conceived for, then you realize that this is way more than what we were told or what the world was told at the point. This is actually part of a militaristic expansionist project. Now, Russia, as a superpower in itself, surely we can see how it has been threatened by this expansion. It has warned numerous times to other countries in the region, to other countries in the world, to the United Nations, to other. It has made public attempts at stopping this growing threat surrounding its borders. And we can see how this was certainly something that became problematic. There was also, as you're well aware, an issue regarding attacks, xenophobic type of attacks on the Russian-speaking population or Russian descendants within Ukraine by extreme right groups, some of them tied to Nazi inheritance. It's a long line of history of fascism and Nazi activism within the Ukraine, and this was also becoming a growing problem. Again, this is not an issue where Venezuela is, by all means, trying to interfere or judge, but I think it is important that we recognize and that we learn more about what has happened in the recent history of Ukraine and and what it entails for Russia's security, so that we can understand where the world has been headed and what things have been going on ever since February. Now, I say this because I think for us, what is really worrying is that we are now seeing, that NATO is supporting Ukraine in this through this military operation that has taken place between Russia and Ukraine, in a way that is not conducing or it's not leading to any resolution or any type of peaceful resolution, but rather is increasing the possibilities of something as catastrophic as a confrontation between countries that have nuclear weapons. Something that, since the end of the Cold War, sort of seemed mostly like a distant, or for most of the time, like a distant reality. Although, of course, there was always that possibility, and there's other countries that where that possibility was probable. But now we see that the constant provision of weapons to Ukraine and the constant actions being taken against Russia in a way that is trying to asphyxiate Russia from the international community. This only increases the levels of problems and the levels of risks of war, not only for Europe, but a war that can obviously have tremendous effects on the rest of of the world. We're seeing this right now in the economic sphere, as these unilateral coercive measures are being imposed on Russia by the United States. And we see the results of, high inflation in the United States and inflation in Europe. The United States had the highest inflation in I think about 40 years that has experienced. Spain had, the highest inflation rate it has seen since the late, the middle of the 1980s, just to, put an example. You see the high prices of wheat, the high prices of, or higher prices of oil that, I think everyone is experiencing. Sorry. You can see that this is already part of the effects that are being felt because of the current situation, and that are felt not only for the countries involved directly, like Russia and Ukraine, for example, but for the rest of the international community. And these things obviously can dangerously increase and become more of a threat for the rest of the world. We, for example, Latin America, just to point out one of the issues that I think is of concern. We see the expansion of NATO as a real threat towards multilateralism, a real threat towards international, not only international diplomacy, but also international law. What we have seen in recent years from NATO has been that we strive so much after World War II to build this sphere of peace and engagement and diplomacy, which is the United Nations, and that you take NATO and decide that you're going to abandon basically the multilateral spaces where countries can come and debate and do diplomacy and work towards peace. You can abandon that basically under NATO and promote an interventionist sort of structure. Again, we saw the use that NATO has had, to invade other countries even outside of Europe or the Atlantic region, and that is why, from Venezuela's point of view, the expansion of NATO is very dangerous. The attitude of NATO is very dangerous. And we need to strive, and we need to continue to build a path towards strengthening the multilateral organizations that exist, that have, the representation of all countries, that have, structures that defend peace and not promote war. We, with other countries, with 19 other nations, have decided to create, a few years ago, a space called the Group of Friends of the United Nations Charter. And the idea in this space is that we defend the original principles of the United Nations Charter. And again, these are the principles for respect of national sovereignty. These are the principles of respect of self-determination. These are the principles of respect and understanding between countries that will lead to diplomacy and not to confrontation. Now, the more that NATO strengthens itself, the more that these institutions are being sidelined, and that we are becoming more under threat. Today, for example, Venezuela is under threat, or I think Venezuela can say that the calling or granting our neighboring country of Colombia the status of global partner of NATO is of course a source of concern. We have had for the last couple of years a very hostile environment, a very hostile government from Colombia, a government that houses 9 U.S. bases, but that besides that has allowed the military presence of the U.S. in all of its military bases. And a presence that involves certain immunity from even from actions and whatever that they do within Colombia. You see human rights groups in Colombia having, trouble to defend themselves from abuses and from things that have come from this military presence in the U.S. But now expanding this by giving Colombia a global partner status within NATO, something that the Biden administration has done. Well, this allows for further cooperation with the U.S. in the training, the military training of Colombia, in the participation of these mercenary groups, or these subcontractors that that now is now the modality where how you see how it's not only the formal armies of a country that intervene and that take part in conflicts, but also you have these subcontractors that also participate. And so you see this emerge in Colombia, now a country that now can talk about having mercenaries as far away as Yemen, or far away, or involved in very serious tragedies, such as the assassination of the president of Haiti, took place recently. And this, of course, is a threat to the stability and to the peace of the region. Colombia now would have access, the first will be first in line to receiving outdated or discarded weaponry from the United States or from other NATO countries. So this again, enhances a very hostile government, the current government, very hostile attitude towards the rest of the region. Now, we don't know what the outcome of the election would be, and of course, what we hope is that whatever choice the Colombian people make is a choice that would guarantee the strengthening of peace and the strengthening of diplomacy. But we can very well understand how threatening it is, to have this presence in the region, especially when we in Venezuela have suffered the impact not only of the Colombian Civil War for many years, but of very recent actions of organized crime groups that are attempting to cross the border into Venezuela, that are attempting to carry out illegal activities, and that we have been trying to push back into Colombia. A lot of these groups that we see when we see them in or trying to come to our territory, and we try to push them out and maintain them on the Colombian side, well, we see that there's no guarantee on the Colombian side that they are criminalized or that they are they're persecuted by the Colombian government. So in a sense, we're basically they have abandoned that border to crime, and the only authority, or the only law enforcement, so to speak, that is trying to maintain a peace and stability in that region, that border region, is the Venezuelan armed force. So again, this presence of, or this issue of declaring Colombia a global partner of NATO in a context where NATO is expanding, where NATO is having a very aggressive policy towards throughout the world, is of course a source of concern for us. I also wanted to speak, and before we get into the questions, and I'm sure we can go more into detail, but I also want to speak about the risk that this is for us, as we have declared our region a zone of peace under the Declaration of CELAC, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States. We have declared this region a zone of peace, and we're trying to maintain this continent as a zone of peace. And the constant threatening, not only of the United States, by the way, because I think there's another actor in this continent that is also very dangerous in this case, which is Canada, and the amount of, and you see it with the amount of money and weapons that Canada is also providing to fuel further confrontation in Ukraine. What I think is a very high concern for us, because these are countries that are very close in proximity to our region, and that is make it very difficult for us to maintain and defend this zone of peace that was declared in 2014 within the CELAC countries. You know, I think what Stan was talking about, with the sense that the similarities of what goes on with what is going on against Russia, with what has gone on against Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. I think we understand very closely what what Russia might be undergoing, because we know what it is to have our countries and our governments threatened militarily at the same time that they are blocked by financially, at the same time that shipments coming to Venezuela have been stopped and have been basically pirated by U.S. authorities or wherever they claim to be. We have seen also the impact that this has had on these measures of financial measures, and have had trying to destroy countries' economies, and the impact that that has had on our countries as well. So we can well understand how Russia right now, and the Russian people primarily, are under threat and are being hurt by these actions. We are clearly and very strongly against all types of unilateral coercive measures. Coercive measures, again, are as dangerous as conventional war. They have as dangerous effects, and we think that there's something that must be resisted and must be they must be, of course, confronted as well. And I think, as we're speaking to mostly a U.S. audience, and I think there's a lot of debate that has to go on, that must take place within the U.S. as to where this is heading, because of course we can see that NATO acts in response to the goals that the United States has had, or that the whole U.S. imperialist system has had. So I think that there has to be a strong questioning within the United States of why is it that investment can't go towards combating the 140 million people under state of poverty, and the building of infrastructure for the U.S. people, or even spending important amount of money on building diplomacy efforts rather than war. And we know there's historically we have heard the famous phrase by Eisenhower that the United States was falling into the hands of an industrial military complex. But I think it is important to question that military complex. And we're just discussing now with Stan and Lane how right now there's more money that is spent on the F-35 warplanes program than is spent in the whole diplomacy for the United States. There's $29 billion that's being spent on the expansion, on the improvement of nuclear weapons, while only $9 billion go to strengthening CDC in the middle of a pandemic. So where are these priorities? Where should we, how can we as international community, but also how can you as citizens of the United States, how can you question that? How can you have a say into how this money is being spent, and how the future of humanity is going to run if we continue to feed the war machine? So I think these are questions that are important to address and to confront. Resources, of course, resources like oil, natural resources, are also coming under threat by the expansion of militarism, by the expansion of these imperialist aims. So I think it's also something that directly affects Venezuela, directly threatens Venezuela. And that is why we feel that it is important to denounce and to work towards dismantling this aggression, this militaristic aggression and expansion of NATO, and to finding ways in which we can work out differences, or we can go back to diplomacy and build that, not only that multipolar world that is trying to finally emerge, but also to sustain it by as it's not a goal in of itself, but sustain it by helping build the structures where we can have cooperation, mutual aid, complementary exchanges, and not competition and aggressions against each other. I'll leave it as that as an intro, and hopefully we can discuss more based on your questions.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. Yeah, I have a couple questions here. I kind of forget growing up in the United States that other countries do take dialogue and diplomacy seriously. So I didn't mention it at all, but countries like Venezuela, diplomacy is something that you take seriously, and dialogue and negotiating. Here, it's just a tool to advance your own interests. So it's good to point out that some countries in the world do consider that a way of solving problems. The first question that came up is from Eugenio Mendoza. It says, is it possible that the aggressive U.S. policy will be exaggerated or exacerbated in Latin America with the defense of the Ukraine, which I imagine he means the U.S. defending Ukraine, which I don't think the U.S. it's destroying Ukraine, and I can't really say Russia's defending Ukraine. So I don't know what he means by defense of Ukraine. But can we expect more pressure to defend the Monroe Doctrine by the U.S. in its so-called backyard, or as Biden generously calls it, your front yard? I had a similar question. If you could go into how you think the conflict would play out if Russia achieved its aims. What would the effect on Venezuela if that happened and the U.S. lost? Or if the U.S. won and Russia lost, what would be the effect on Venezuela? But as it is now, it doesn't seem like either one of them is going to become a real victor. But I'll leave that for now.
Look, I think, well, first of all, I think part of the objective of certain interests in the United States, I believe, is that, the aim of Russian defeat, is basically something that they would, seek, so that there's not a chance that Russia can become strong and that Russia can compete. And of course, there's a aim of splitting up Russia into different segments and so forth. I think that's something that has been the objective, and it's very clear that is not only the objective with regards to Russia, but I think it's also a reality that's an objective with other countries that the United States feels threatens, such as China. Now, I say this because that I think is probably the aim on that one side, and that is something that if that were to take place, of course, it would take still going to take a while and so forth. So I don't like to make predictions, or I don't think it's healthy for us to make speculations about what can take place or not if one loses one side or the other. I think as long as the military offensive nature of NATO still exists, we are all losing as humanity. I think it's a threat to all of humanity. So of course it is a threat to us in Venezuela. I don't think that necessarily, I think that once you open the door to a conflict of this magnitude with countries that have nuclear weapons, we never know what the outcome can be. We're very far, and in Venezuela we're very far from this Ukraine, or from whatever's going on there. But if there were to be a nuclear confrontation, we will be affected immediately, as will be the rest of the planet. I mean, you have people, there's theories about the nuclear winter and all these possibilities. So of course it's something that I think threatens and that could affect Venezuela. I think that if the United States, if the militarism of the United States advances, NATO and the United States advances, any country that has precious resources that are necessary for conflict also become part of, they become threatened. Venezuela has, the largest reserve of oil throughout the world. So it is hard to, it will be very difficult to think that we will somehow not be affected, the more these conflicts prolong themselves or expand. If the United States has a more aggressive policy, if the United States gets involved directly into some of these conflicts that is, that seem to sometimes be brewing, not only with regards to Russia, but also with regards to, China, then, we could also definitely feel a threat because we are close source of oil resources to the United States as a party in conflict. So I don't want to make speculations of what would happen, and if one wins or the other. I don't think that's the point. I think that the point is that we have to strive towards coming back to diplomacy, towards finding a way of ending conflicts, and that until that is resolved, the whole world is somehow under threat by this advance that NATO is promoting.
Okay, thanks. Another question is, could you please comment on the boycott? I don't know if it's actually boycott of Biden's summit of the Americas and the role of the OAS in Latin America.
Sure. Well, I think that it is not surprising. We have since 2019, the policy of the United States has been to undermine the Venezuelan constitution, the Venezuelan people, and their elected government of President Maduro. And by so, I think it's undermining also the region, the whole region itself. So this, whatever decision, I mean, they still say that they haven't decided who they're going to invite or not, and then, there's a lot of back and forth with the spokespersons for this, and who knows what how they will finally resolve this issue, but it is clearly, you cannot exclude countries from a region, because we don't cease to exist just because we're not on a guest list by the United States. So whatever meeting the United States has, and they call it the Summit of the Americas. Well, if NATO members are there, of course, and we have to ask if it could really be called that. In any case, I don't think that's really as important as what we are building as a region. And we have seen during the last year a very important strengthening of CELAC, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States. I think that is very important. We're again, strengthening a space for dialogue, for cooperation in countries that don't necessarily have to have the same point of view, the same perspective on everything. That's how we built CELAC in the first place, with very varied political ideological positions, but with a very important concern of trying to defend our sovereignty as a region, trying to find ways to cooperate and strengthen each other. So I think, whatever happens, ends up happening with some of the Americas. I think we have made, the region itself has made very clear that we are all members of this continent. You cannot separate them. You have heard the voices of the president of Mexico and the president of Argentina and the Caribbean and other countries expressing that you can't just pick who is and who isn't part of this region. We're all here together. We're all neighbors. We're all willing to, be part of this community. And one country cannot be the one that determines who is and who isn't part of the region.
Okay, and I have two other questions. One of it is, do you or Venezuela see the fear of Ukraine and other Eastern European nations that they may be hindered in their self-determination by Russia, and that's why they seek alliances with the West? And another question was, oh, that was it. No.
I'm sorry, Stan, I lost you a little bit. Could you repeat that?
Oh, is that do you or Venezuela, do you see that the fear of that Ukraine has and other Eastern European nations have, that they may be hindered in their self-determination by Russia, and that which drives them to seek alliances with the West? And the last question was there anything else that Russia could have done other than a military operation in the Ukraine?
Well, again, it's kind of difficult for me to, and I don't think it's my position to comment on what Russia could have or should have done. I do understand, though, that there was a growing expansion of NATO that disregarded Russia's security interests, and this is not me saying, this is Russia. And Russia made this very public, and for many years, not only just now. Russia has been commenting on that. Again, it is not my place or our place to pass judgment on that, but it certainly is. We must understand that if a country in question is, continuously saying it feels that its security interests are not taken into account, then you can understand why it acts or doesn't act in certain ways. Now, again, I also cannot speak for other countries in the region and how they may feel threatened or not by actions that take place. Our stand and for Venezuela, again, is that the more that this the more that these threats to stability and security are posed by NATO, which is the disturbing factor here, and was the disturbing factor because there was these countries enjoyed stability and security for many years before these more recent events. As long as there's this disturbing force, with NATO, then we're definitely going to have a risk not only for the neighboring countries, but for the rest of humanity. We can see how that, we can easily be dragged into this conflict, whether it be because of the, the resources that are needed from our countries, or the expansion of or the effects that are felt by military confrontation, or the economic effects that are currently, in place right now. I think, if you look at Europe right now, Europe is feeling a very strong, boomerang effect of its measures against Russia. It tries to impose limits on Russian economy and Russian finances, and it then ends up absorbing that large part of the impact. So, I think it's really the expansion of NATO what's really of concern and of threat for humanity right now.
Okay. Yeah, Susan Scott was going to ask about NATO and Colombia, and if it's NATO's being, you think the situation will be worse if there's, and is NATO being strengthened by the Ukraine conflict, and how that'll affect the relation with Colombia and Venezuela. I was also wondering, since I know there's, I know some of that you've answered already, but I know there's also been ongoing armed conflicts on the Venezuela-Colombia border with the paramilitary groups coming from Colombia. And do you have any knowledge of the NATO is connected with that? I mean, I assume it is indirectly, but do you have any other knowledge that we may not have here, that the NATO is playing a role in that conflict now?
Look, I think that when you have a strong military presence, and especially when you have the presence in the bases, when you have presence in training processes, Venezuela suffered an invasion in 2020 of mercenaries that was led by a group that was trained in Colombia, and some of the trainers were actually, even U.S. So this is part of this mechanism, that is only increasing by giving Colombia the status of global partner. So I think again, that means more weapons coming to Colombia, more military training, more presence of mercenaries and equipment and all these things that can eventually threaten our stability, and our stability, just that military presence doesn't mean it doesn't only concern the formal military, but in a country that has a tradition of these informal outlaw paramilitary groups, then you see it is quite a threat also, that these weapons are there, that these trainers are there, because you never know, weapons get lost, weapons get stolen, and so forth, and we all know certain stories can come up out of that. So yes, I think it is something of concern. It's an issue of concern for us, because we have had in recent years this very difficult relationship with a government in Colombia that has been very hostile to us. There's no diplomatic relations with Colombia. There's nobody to answer the phone if you need to, voice a concern, and that is certainly something that that complicates and that that becomes a source of destabilizing for Venezuela. So I think in that sense, it is a strengthened NATO position for Colombia. Surely is a risk for all of its neighbors, not just Venezuela.
Okay, and then there are two other questions, which I guess we're running low on time. If you could just answer it short. The first one is, as a result of the boycott of Russian crude oil and the global rise in oil prices, what overtures has the U.S. made to Venezuela to ease sanctions and increase Venezuela oil exports to Europe? And the other question is the growing influence and investment of China in Latin America seen as positive or negative?
Yes. Well, so far there has not been a significant change in the relationship between Venezuela and the U.S. With regards to oil production. Now, Venezuela used to be a very reliable source of oil for the U.S. until under the Trump administration, very serious and tight sanctions, so-called sanctions, unilateral measures were implemented against Venezuela. It was an action taken by the U.S. It's not an action taken by Venezuela. Venezuela, still had, wanted to have a commercial relationship with the United States. So we have to wait and see if they do make any changes to, within this new context, if they do make any changes. We have had information that it's moving towards, the United States may be moving towards, changes in this policy. I think that, of course, it will be positive in the sense that as any of these unilateral measures that are lifted, of course, will be a positive, will have a positive effect on Venezuela, but we still have to wait to see if that is taking place or that is going to take place. And remind me of the second part of the question, Sam.
The other person was
China, right? So
yes, I mean, it's a rhetoric, so could be a 2-hour webinar right there. But the growing influence, investment in China and Latin America is seen as positive or negative.
Well, depends by who. I mean, and I think one of the issues of concern in the region is that the United States has been threatened by Latin America having a more independent foreign policy. And it's not just Venezuela. Countries such as Brazil have very large economic exchanges with China, even under Bolsonaro. This is something, of course, inherited under the Workers' Party governments, but Bolsonaro still maintains a very strong economic relationship with China. China has been a partner to Venezuela, and what I mean partner is not just somebody that comes to your country and tries to impose something on you. It means benefit for both countries, and the United States has not been a partner to this region or to our countries. So for us, I think for Latin America, the reason why there is so much cooperation with China right now by countries that are not necessarily ideologically close to China is because China has tried to be a partner for us, somebody that brings and offers something and and takes something back, and there's a productive exchange. What we have had for over 200 years since the Monroe Doctrine in this region has been basically the attempts of imposing policies towards Latin America that are only beneficial to the interests of the United States and to some elites in our countries that also obtain some benefit, but not for the entire people. Until the United States has a change into how it relates itself to Latin America and really embraces the idea of partnership, win-win situations, I don't think it's going to be able to be a better partner than China or than any other country that comes here with a mind frame of cooperation, not of imposition.
Okay, well, thank you, Carlos. It's good to get Venezuela's perspective on these things, considering all the misinformation that we are fed even more than we were a few years ago. It kind of reminds me today of when we used to read about Venezuela, that everybody was starving to death and they were raiding the zoos to eat the zoo animals and so on. Now I'll turn it over to Elaine, and William can talk a little about the Workers' Summit.
Thanks, Stan. And thanks so much, Carlos. It was a very interesting conversation, and I just want to appreciate all of the really good questions that we received from the attendees. So thank you all around. This has been a great webinar, and I think it's really important to continue to have these webinars and participate and share these with our community, because we are not getting this perspective really anywhere else. I want to just take a minute before I close. William is in the car right now driving to Caracas, so I wanted to do just a quick promotion and just say a few words about the Summit of the Americas. And which many of you have heard of. It's the 9th Summit of the Americas being held in early June in Los Angeles. The governments of Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba were not invited, and many other heads of state said they won't attend if invitations are not extended to all countries. There are two counter conferences being organized. One of them is in LA, the People's Conference, and the other is in Tijuana, the Workers' Summit. So just a little bit more on the Workers' Summit. It'll be June 10th through June 12th. And so if you would like to support the conference in any way, if you would like to attend, if you would like to volunteer, please get in touch. I'm putting the website in the chat right now that has contact information. Share the registration page with your friends. We'll be sending out some announcements in the coming days that we're specifically asking people to share with their networks. So with that, I will close out. And again, thank you so much for everybody that participated tonight. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Stan. And I hope you have a good night.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Take care.